Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me for another of my interview series. Today I want to talk to a farmer, and who better to talk to than Patrick Holden, who I visited about 2.5 years ago, sort of in the middle of COVID. And I was in a beautiful field on a Welsh dairy farm. It was absolutely magical with all these beautiful cows. I'm going to show you some pictures in a second just to set the scene. Patrick Holden is the founder and I think the manager, I'll get to him in a second, of the Sustainable Food Trust. He's also a dairy farmer of over 40 years, and he's very much, when I last spoke to him, into trying to get people to be interested in real food, proper food that is in a sustainable manner on real farms. So here, just let's have a look. This is from my YouTube video, which I shall link below, of the interview I did a couple of years ago, where we talk about that in more detail. Just have a look at these. Hello. So there we go. There's that's the farm, and sitting in his office is Patrick Holden. Hello, Patrick.
Hello.
It's been a long time. I love my visit down to your wonderful farm. We saw a sort of glimpse there of what it is. So those beautiful dairy cows on grass and clover, I think it was. All that time. It seems a long time ago because things have moved on since then. How is the farm and how are you?
Well, it is good. You mentioned it was over 40 years. It's actually 50 years this year
Is it?
that we've been on this farm. So we're now the longest established organic dairy farm in Wales. And obviously, we're having a big celebration. And it is rather interesting to have a relationship with a piece of land, a landscape, really, over 50 years, because you see the results of your actions and your farming on the landscape and nature.
Yes.
Um, they're really good, actually, really positive. The farm feels alive. Somebody said to me the other day that this part of West Wales is quite magical, and I think it really is. It's got an atmosphere, a sort of Celtic spirit, and nature is still more, in the ascendant here. And yeah, we're lucky to be here.
Well, it's great that you're saying that nature is in the ascendant, because farming seems to be under attack at the moment. There seems to be some very odd notions coming, sort of global notions about farming. We've seen how the Dutch farmers have been, things just seem very strange with the nature of trying to stop beef farming, dairy farming, and who knows, we may have a pandemic of avian flu or whatever, which will affect poultry, of course. And so farmers must feel a little bit under threat. Do you feel under threat?
No, but I feel that farming is in a terrible mess at the moment. It's been really part of the problem through no fault of the farming community for decades now. And that's because of wrong policies, misdirecting subsidies, our insatiable desire for cheap food, all those kind of things. And at the moment, there's a move to do something about it, but a lot of people have got the wrong end of the stick. And I think that there is a potential solution, which is that all the farmers of the world changed to farming practices that worked in harmony with nature, we could produce enough food to feed us all in a sustainable way without degrading the natural capital that we've been kind of mining, really, in the post-war period. But unfortunately, there are, as you said, there are lots of wrong attitudes out there, one of which is with the present government, who have got some kind of blind faith in the white heat of technology. So they want to introduce new gene editing, well, they have introduced new gene editing legislation, which is going to allow us to meddle with the stuff of life even more than we already have been doing, which is a lot. And I think there will only be bad consequences.
Yes. Well, I mean, a lot of people had pointed to me this act that's just passed, and I did a little video where I just introduced to my audience about the act is coming, and not fully understanding it myself because I'm A, not a gene therapist, and B, not a farmer, but just the idea of meddling to that degree with nature seems absolutely abhorrent. And so I wanted to get a professional farmer of 50 years experience to tell us, what will that do? How significant will it be if we push through with that sort of thing for our food and for our animals and crops?
Well, you said you're not a gene therapist. Well, nor am I, but neither am I a gene technologist. So my answers are going to be kind of lay answers, like an intelligent farming perspective rather than a science perspective. But in case you want to follow this up even more, I do know a gene therapist, funnily enough. He's
Oh,
called
right.
Dr. Michael Antonio. He fixes people's genes, sick people, for a living. So, and he is one of the world's living experts on gene therapy, and therefore he knows a lot about genetic engineering. So, despite doing it for a living, he is vehemently opposed to genetic engineering and this gene editing stuff, which has just been passed in the Commons. And you might want to talk to him because he can explain the science behind it. But what I would say is that if you look at what's happening in agriculture, and this is literally during my farming lifetime, there's been a dramatic narrowing of the gene pool. So more and more of the food we eat is produced with fewer and fewer animal species, and those same species have been bred very intensively, so that few strains, few sort of gene families are responsible for more and more of the food that we're eating. So it seems to me that it is absolutely to add insult to the injury that we've inflicted on nature to say, well, that isn't good enough. Now we're going to meddle around with the genes within the species using genetic engineering techniques, but using the genes within a single species to accelerate progress, heavy inverted commas, towards plants and animals, which will serve us even better, as if we were masters of the universe, which we shouldn't see ourselves as being. We're part of nature. We're not separate from nature. We're part of nature. And what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And I think that's the real frightening thing about this, the arrogance, the hubris of these scientists, most of whom have nothing to do with agricultural practice, who think now that we can somehow improve further on nature, that we can breed crops which are drought resistant, which are salt tolerant, which can thrive in environments which we've already degraded. So it's absolutely treating the symptoms, not the cause. I can predict that there will only be bad consequences from it. And instead, there's a better way, which is to listen to the science of an emergent science, actually, of epigenetics. I don't know if you've ever heard of
No,
epigenetics.
do tell me.
Well, all living organisms are constantly interacting with their external environment. This happens physically, it even happens emotionally. So, I'm talking to you. This will affect my state. You affect my state, I affect yours. In the plant and animal kingdoms, the cows that you saw in that clip living on this farm, over generations, they will adapt to the unique climate, soils, and environment of this place. It's the same with the plants as well. That is what we call epigenetic adaptation. So in time, the grasses will be more suited to this unique place than they would have been many years ago. And yet with plant and animal breeding, we've forgotten that, or we haven't taken that into account. There was a man, a philosopher called, and a scientist called Rudolf Steiner, who's very well known for education, Waldorf education. You might have heard of him. He was around in the beginning of the 20th century. And he basically said in a series of lectures he gave in 1924, farmers should breed from the plants and animals on their farms because they will become adapted to the place over time. Well, that's exactly the science of, he didn't know this then, but
No.
so it's epigenetics. So instead of splicing the genes, we should allow nature to
do its work.
Our genome, my genome, yours, the animals and the plants, and we should eat accordingly. And that should be the new policy which should be adopted by DEFRA. And maybe we can prevail if there is a change of government in a couple of years, which I suspect there will be. We need to go to Keir Starmer and say, look, Keir, the Tories have got it wrong. He'll like that. And your new shadow Secretary of State, I did meet him the other day, actually. I met Keir Starmer and said, hey, we need to talk. Yes. He said, okay, I'll introduce you to my Secretary of State. So I said, good. And it hasn't happened yet, but I'm hoping to have a meeting with them and with him, it is, and we'll talk. And I'll say, look, do you want to eat good food that'll make you healthy? Don't listen to these scientists who think they can improve on nature. They've made a terrible job of it so far. They're only going to make it worse.
Yes. What you sort of described with the, what was it again?
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics.
Yeah, look it up.
Yeah, but I mean, what you've described is basically saying the old ways of farming families, generation after generation after generation, nurturing and looking after their farms, it is the way and the only way to really get the maximum benefit. And as you say, not the scientists flying it. Why do you think they want to do this? What would be the motivation?
I don't know. I think it's this somehow. I think there are two answers to that question. There seems to be, as I said before, some sort of blind faith and belief in science, as if science was the thing. And it's really I think the government think we can lead the world with technology. And it's weird, isn't it? We Brexited and we severed our links with the scientific community in the European Union. And somehow I think we can go it alone with our brilliant tech or our brilliant science, which I just think it's not only nonsense, but it's dangerous because it separates us from a deeper understanding of our relationship with nature at a critical moment when, we have Attenborough saying we're in the last chance saloon on nature. We have the Climate Change Committee saying we're the last chance saloon on climate. And yet still we think that we can use tech to impose even more catastrophic damage on the planet. And the really bottom line is that it'll affect our health. We need to eat from healthy plants and animals. And changing the genes to see if they can survive in a hostile environment is treating the symptom, not the cause. The first responsibility of farmers is to breed healthy and vital plants and animals. Then the food that they produce will be good for us as well.
In our conversation that we had 2.5 years ago, which I will link below for the viewers to look at, we were talking, and one of the reasons I wanted to meet you and talk to you about, because of the Sustainable Food Trust, we were talking about how processed food as it is today is not as healthy as the organic way and nurturing the farm in smaller farms and more local and all of that. If we go down this route of now genetically modifying the food, we're even more disturbing the quality of the food and the minerals and the vitamins and all those health-giving things. We're in such a dreadful health situation anyway. We've come through COVID, and of course there's all these implications of people who are being ill from all sorts of different things at the moment. The waiting lists are beyond the pale, and trust in doctors and hospitals has never been lower. And the one thing that can keep us in good health, that if we take back the responsibility for our health rather than relying on people giving you pills, is quality food, which is where people like you and farmers all around the country and all around the world, you are our doctors and our saviors. And I sometimes feel you don't get enough respect for that incredible role that you're doing.
No, food as medicine or whatever you want to say, the precondition for health is good food. And it's very hard these days, I regret to say, to find good food in most supermarkets because they've turned the farmers that supply them into commodity slaves, forcing them to become even ever more intensive. and buying the crops at very low prices so we can get so-called cheap food, which isn't really cheap at all because the hidden costs are threatening to bankrupt the health service because, you know, a lot of the previously uncommon health conditions that we're suffering from today are directly and indirectly related to intensification of farming, all the commonness of cancers and food intolerances and obesity and diabetes. A lot of these go back directly to changes in farming practice and, of course, to ultra processing of food. And we really need to become empowered citizens and find a way to purchase food which is healthier for us. And that's not so easy today. But in the end, it will be up to individual citizens to bring about this change. And by the way, on that subject, I've heard it said a few times in the last few days that with the election coming up, farming and food will not feature on the political agenda. And I'm afraid to say that at the moment, that does appear to be the case. So if enough of us take action and start to say, look, this really does matter to us, then maybe we can gain the politicians' attention. Because in terms of climate change, in terms of making sure that we have a livable planet for our children, agriculture is in the front line. You think about it, go up into space, look down on planet Earth. What's the activity on the surface? Farming. So farming is the lungs and the digestive system of planet Earth. And we've done a lot of harm to the farms and the soils over which we have stewardship. As I said, it's not the farmer's fault because they've got the wrong policy and financial environment. But if we commit to eat as citizens a healthier food, and we beat a path to the door of the retailers and the farmers that supply it, we can be the change and we can make this a political issue for the next election. Will it happen? It's got to happen. I mean, it's that important. Our health depends on it. The health of the planet depends on it. There's a lot to talk about there, obviously. But the reason I'm excited about it is because after 50 years on this farm, we can see the nature that coexists with the food production. Our yields are going up. We've got a plethora of farmland birds, of insects. It's so beautiful here. I feel like taking you for a walk in the farm, but you'll have to come again.
I will. I will.
It's really lovely here. And there's nothing we're doing here which is not potentially applicable by every farmer in the world. It's just about farming in harmony with nature, building soil, being respectful of all the kingdoms with which we interact. And the cheese that we produce here, a cheese called Havod, Hafod, if you want to follow us on Instagram, at Havod Cheese, it's so delicious. It won a prize at the World Food Awards, a gold at the World Food Awards. And it is a reflection of the unique environment of this place. That's how all food ought to be in the future. And it can be.
And the thing is, until you sample real food, you don't know. And my worry is that we're bringing up a generation, the next generation, who are so used to cardboard food and then would-be synthetic food that they'll have no sense of what actually real food is and the quality, the taste, the flavour, and the respect for food, which is another thing, because it really breaks my heart when you see people piling out of a pub and just going to a takeaway, buying some very heavily industrial processed chicken, for example. They don't eat most of it anyway, and it's just sort of strewn on the streets. Never mind the mess. The respect for that life that has been bred in such an intense way. I mean, that's really just got to stop, hasn't it? We've got to think about
it. And what you describe is sad. And you could be a bit pessimistic about it. You could say we trained 2 generations of people now not to understand proper food because they haven't had an experience of it, no fault of their own, and to waste a lot of food, as you describe, which is partly, I think, a symptom that people at some intuitive level don't think the food's very good, so they don't think about wasting it because they just don't value it. It's cheap, it's adulterated, it's not actually very good, and they treat it that way. But I think at some deeper level, if you give somebody real food produced in harmony with nature, which tastes delicious, there's enough, whatever it is, genetic memory or something in us which recognizes authenticity in food and in other things as well. So I think we have to believe in that. We have to believe that this chapter that we're in can end and be replaced by something better. Because obviously I'm old. I'm a child of the 60s. And I remember at the end of the 60s, early 70s, when we moved here, it felt as if there was a bit of a consciousness change going on. A lot of people were feeling, especially through music, actually, that there was something amazing happening and we were part of it. But I think the young people today, Generation Z, whatever it's called, the post-millennial generation, get this stuff. It's something which has just come into them, and they know they've got to live differently and act differently. They don't seem to be so materialistic, at least some of them. And I think there is an emergent interest in the kind of things that we've been discussing this morning, which is very good cause for hope.
I hope so. I mean, one of the things that worries me, that if you wanted to get into farming as a young person and you thought, I really want to work on the land or with animals, it's extremely difficult to get going in that area.
But I agree, because the price of land and everything else, but I was like that. I lived in Barnet, and I'm a London child, really.
Right.
And I fell in with some interesting people and went to San Francisco the right time, came back, drank the Kool-Aid and thought, oh, I want to get back to the land, man. And, farms were expensive. I didn't have any money. So I went and worked on someone else's farm. And I thought, okay, luckily somebody that I knew had some money, so we got a farm. And then it took me 30 years from arriving here to actually own the farm. And even then, it was mostly a bank that owned 80% of it.
Yeah.
So I know what it is to go into farming without any money.
But the thing is, though, Patrick, you wanted to do it. What I'm saying is it's very difficult for young people to do it, because the whole education system now almost negates the fact that it's a career.
That's true. It is not on the career. It's totally not. If you go to your career person in your school and say, what do you think of a career in agriculture? They look at you a bit strange, I suspect. But if you are interested, there is a way forward. And by the way, we're working in this Sustainable Food Trust with a wonderful man called Richard Dunn, who was a head teacher at a primary school in the Thames Valley, and who realized that even though he was Ofsted outstanding, it's a bit like all this horrible stuff that's gone on with that person who committed suicide recently because they had a bad Ofsted report. Well, he was Ofsted outstanding, but he still realized that his education system that he was in charge of wasn't fit for purpose. And he said, we need an education which enables the children in our care to make sense of the world they find themselves in, close to nature and all that sort of thing, and to know what their career path is to make it a better place in the future. And so he's developed an education manual for teachers, primary school teachers, which is in 8 languages.
Wow.
Chinese, Japanese, Ukrainian, Dutch was the latest. And this is literally a primary school teacher could take this manual and introduce it into their own school without having to change the curriculum. It's all about, instead of telling children things, you get them to ask the right questions. Inquiries of learning, he calls it. So why is nature beautiful? Where does my food come from? All those sort of questions, which are very simple questions, which we can all ask. He embeds them into the learning process. It's brilliant. And so we need an education revolution. And actually in Wales, West Wales, he's working now with the 10 heads of the local primary schools to get this harmony education curriculum embedded in the local school sector. Isn't that amazing?
Well, that is brilliant. Yeah, if only more schools would embrace it. I know some schools do a little bit of they have allotments and they grow veg, which is the beginning of getting some kids close to nature in some way, or seeing the growing process and then realizing actually this is a unique and magic thing, which
all that. So if anybody's involved with education listening to this, watching this now, go to the Sustainable Food Trust website.
I'll put a link.
The Harmony Project. You will find all this stuff I'm talking about. You can take action and put this into your own school. It's really exciting. It's an education revolution you suggested is needed It's happening, starting to happen. And by the way, it's not just primary school education. The local university, University of Wales, Trinity St David's, of which Lampeter University is a part, they're putting this harmony into the curriculum as well. And our farm, we've got a threshing barn we've converted into an education space with heating and facility for meetings and stuff. So we're going to have a relationship with the local university. So we are hosting courses for people who want to learn about practice, not just learning with their heads stuck in the classroom, but actually kind of learning in the morning, practice in the afternoon, which is how I learned how to farm in the first place, because I did a course in biodynamic farming. And it was very much a sort of hybrid between intellectual stuff and practice, which is, I think, what we need.
Absolutely. I can hear from you the enthusiasm and the positive nature. You honestly think that there is a future for farming. We've spoken how you can be pessimistic at the last stance, but we sort of appear to be at a tipping point with the pressures that are coming down from government into one direction.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story about that. So, you were to ask all the people who are watching this now, what do you think? What do you think you should eat to be healthy and sustainable? Most people say, well, we've got to cut down on meat and red meat, cow meat and dairy products in particular. In fact, that's not true. You heard it here. Yeah. Basically, we did a carbon audit on this farm, which means you check all the, you measure all the diesel, the electricity, the feed you're using, the soil carbon, everything, and you work out how much carbon you're emitting into the atmosphere. Now, everybody thinks that livestock farms are the worst. Turns out we are actually carbon negative on this farm. Isn't that amazing? Even though we've got 150 cows on the farm, organically managed cows. The reason why we are carbon negative is because the interaction of the cows that you saw grazing in that field in that clip and the soil creates soil and builds soil organic matter. So when you scale that right across this farm, the carbon sequestration going into the soil is more than our energy use with all the things that we're doing, which require electricity and all that kind of thing. So in fact, if you want to eat food which is part of a carbon-friendly future, dairy products and grass-fed and mainly grass-fed lamb and beef from regenerative farms, it's absolutely part of the solution. Whereas cheap chicken, you mentioned chicken, is, I'm afraid, part of the problem. If we want the change that we've been discussing, we need to stop eating cheap, industrially fed livestock. That they're mainly fed on grain. They are absolutely part of the problem. But the sort of cows we have here, they're part of the solution. Isn't that exciting?
Well, it is, absolutely. And I've stood there on that field in the grass and the clover, and people can go back and look at that clip or watch the other clip where I did the interview with you before. And the luscious nature of those fields around you. I mean, I presume you get quite a lot of rain over there in Wales, I imagine. Massive, there you go.
Which never stops raining here, but we love it.
But you love it.
And on the farm, we swim in it every day. It's fed by springs. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I can tell the audience it was very magical coming down to there. Unfortunately, where I live in Sussex, they're building houses, horrible, boring. What's the word I'm looking for? Just boxes on farmland. It's being snapped up left, right, and centre and developed, which is a huge shame because there's so much history here, and this is happening a lot in the south of England. But obviously, we need to hold on to that land because it's for the future generations to also farm.
We do. And we as individual citizens, we are the cells of the food system. Think of the food system like a giant organism. We're the cells. What we eat matters. It matters for our health, but it also matters because we are the transformative agent, starting with ourselves. We cannot rely on the government. We've seen that.
No.
We cannot rely on big food companies. They actually are slaves to us. So if we eat differently and buy different food, they'll have to change too. So if you're watching this, feel empowered, feel good about yourself. You can understand the universe from understanding your own body because it is in microcosm, an ecosystem which is representative of the whole universe and certainly the planet. And our own microbiome, we know all about this now. The gut flora is the key to our health. And in a way, that microbiome is in microcosm reflected in the soil. Everything's an ecosystem. We're
Yes.
an ecosystem. It's all there for us to understand within ourselves, especially if we meditate, discuss. 300.
And what better place to meditate than on a beautiful Welsh farm in the pouring rain with
Quite right.
all those animals around?
Quite right.
Patrick, it's been an absolute joy to catch up with you. I'd love to come back and visit you on your farm. I know that when I was there, you were doing up a little area that you were going to have as an Airbnb. I don't know if that ever materialised, but you seem to have, in the last 2 years, done a lot more with your
Yes, we've got an
training centre.
cabin which is on Airbnb, and we're aspiring to do more. As I said, we want to host courses here as an extension to the nearby university. We want this farm to become an educational platform. We think that's important.
Yes, well, and all that experience that you've gained that you can plough back is so, and you're enthusiastic. A lot of farmers are under difficult situations. It's great to have somebody who's enthusiastic and positive for the future, and saying how important we as individual people are to that future.
We recognize each other, but everything's connected. Nothing's separate. I see this more and more. We know. See in ourselves what we recognize things in other people, and when we connect, that's important.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you so much for talking to me today. The links to the Sustainable Trust will be in the description, and I'll also link to your wonderful cheese so that people can go and sample some real food so you know what it tastes like. And so it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, do join me again on another of my interviews. But for now, from Patrick and I, goodbye.